So I had my sort of intro started out here that I'm realizing is a little bit of an obligatory intro for all of us, which is this idea, traditional information processing approaches, feed forward, blah, blah, blah. I can skip most of that. So we know this idea, the idea is sort of see, think, act. I'm one of those people who's going to be looking at this from a vision point of view, and today I'm going to be talking about work from my lab that shows that our mere potential for action, our capacity for action, can shape and inform basic visual processes. So to investigate the relationship between visual processing and our context for performing actions, I've leveraged the idea that objects within our reach, that is objects near our hands in perihand space, have a special importance to us out there in the world. So it is only those objects that are near our hands that we're able to interact with immediately. So we can reach out to grab a desired object, we can pick, pull, push, or otherwise manipulate our immediate surroundings. But at any given point in time, we can only do that for the stuff that's in perihand space. I'm also interested in this question about vision in perihand space because understanding interactions between our context to be able to perform certain action and how that's going to shape visual cognition is increasingly important as our world is relying more and more on touchscreen types of human-computer interfaces where the ways our hands are positioned, how we're actually holding these devices might matter for how we effectively sample information from these devices. So we know now there's been over a decade of research. It was trendy for a while. I think maybe it's kind of backing off now. But there's research that provides evidence that observers do experience alterations in vision for objects that are viewed in perihand space. So the typical kind of study here, and you can do this with all kinds of different visual cognition paradigms that researchers have, we're going to bring people into the lab, sit them in front of a computer for a typical visual cognition task, and compare their performance on that task under, typically it's a hands-mirrored condition where you're viewing information framed between the two hands on the display, compare that to a hands-far condition. Occasionally, you also see researchers doing a single hand manipulation where maybe I'm doing a task with one hand up on the display and I can detect, do some sort of processing of something that's presented right within that hand's grasping space or presented on the opposite side of the display, far from the hand. And these sorts of studies have reliably found that observers experience changes in perception, attention, and memory when we're talking about processing information in perihand space. So while much of this research appeals to the idea that we experience altered vision near the hands to help us more effectively interact with our environment, it's all about action, guys. Little of this work has actually directly examined links between how our hands are positioned to act, what we can do with our hands in the moment, and what sorts of information the visual processing system is going to play up or emphasize when we're doing these tasks. So in my lab, we've been investigating how changes in visual processing in perihand action space may specifically assist observers evaluating items that are candidates for action. So this work stems from this idea that visual processing is working specifically in the service of action. We see in the manner that we do in order to effectively act our environment. So I'm going to be talking to you guys for the rest of this talk about evidence from recent work in my lab suggesting the visual system's adaptive sensitivity to behavioral context extends to the actions we're prepared to take. When we view information with our hands in a certain posture, that's going to bias visual processing. We weight processing based on our current capabilities for action, our action affordances. These sensitivities, in fact, even seem to extend to the affordances of the co-actors in our environment. So there's a piece about social action acting with another person. This also seems to make a difference with processing in perihand space. So to start out with this idea that action affordances inform vision, we're reasoning that if visual processing is really working in the service of action, then the actions we're prepared to take should influence the visual biases we see in near-hand space. So I'm going to refer to this as the grasp affordance hypothesis. And this is essentially suggesting that the visual biases that might be helpful to a football player, American football here, apologies to anybody who's thinking football, soccer, no, we're talking about stuff with the hands. The visual biases that might help a football player who's getting ready to catch a pass are not necessarily going to be same visual biases that will be helpful to a tailor who is attempting to thread a needle. So we know that when people are interacting with nearby objects, we typically adopt one of these two different grasp postures. We can have a power grasp posture where we're going to use the fingers as a unit to secure an item against the palm, or we can have a precision grasp sort of posture where we're going to use the thumb and forefinger, maybe some of the other fingers will get involved as well, but we're using this to have an object come in contact with the tips of our fingers for a more detail-oriented type of action. So we know the visual system is attuned to grasp affordances. We represent objects based on whether they more readily afford a power or precision grasp. And we also know that when people view pictures of hands in these sorts of postures, it's going to automatically bias attention to grasp-congruent objects. So based on this, this led me to the idea that power grasp affordances might introduce a visual bias toward increased temporal sensitivity. This is going to play up the visual information that will aid us in power grasping actions, actions that are fast and forceful. These are things in the lab, something like a target detection task where you're trying to get a rapid change in luminance that you want to pick up on very quickly. Out in the real world, this is stuff like catching a ball. These are tasks where good temporal resolution is going to be more helpful to you in successfully executing your action. On the other hand, a precision grasp affordance should instead introduce a bias toward increased spatial sensitivity, playing up the visual information that's going to aid in more delicate, detail-oriented sorts of actions. In the lab, this might be something like discriminating high spatial frequency information. Out in the real world, this is stuff like threading a needle, tying a shoe, tasks where good spatial resolution is more important to effectively reducing actions. So I'll be going over some work to support this grasp affordance hypothesis. A second consideration that we can think about here is that if visual biases are tied to effective action production, the crosstalk we see between vision and action should be informed by the actions to which we recently put our hands. That is, the hand's function should be more important than their form. That is, altered vision near the hands is a result, it's due to experience-driven plasticity. And this is what I call the action experience hypothesis. I'll present a little evidence in favor of this stuff. So in order to test these ideas about action affordances informing vision, we've been bringing people into the lab and measuring their temporal and spatial sensitivity using tasks, motion detection task, and a form perception task. In our motion detection task, we're giving participants 101 pixel dots in the center of a display, and these dots go through 8 50-millisecond motion frames, so we're pretty rapidly integrating signals across these frames. And the dots all shift 1 pixel per frame, and these dots can shift either 1 pixel in a signal direction that's determined trial by trial to be either to the left or to the right, or the dots can be noise dots that are designated instead to shift 1 pixel in a randomly determined direction. They're not helping you. And our participants' job is to say, are most of the dots moving left, or are they moving right? We're minimizing local motion cues here, by the way, by randomly determining a dot's position every 2 frames. So those of you who are thinking lower level, you can't track a single dot across the display to do this. You're going to need to integrate your motion signal over the entire display. We take participants through a staircase procedure here, where we're raising or lowering the proportion of noise to signal dots based on whether participants get the response correct or incorrect. So this is helping us center in on the threshold, just how much signal do you need here in order to do this motion detection task. We're testing spatial sensitivity in a similar fashion, doing a form perception task. So in this case, participants again are seeing 101 pixel dots in the center of our display. These dots, though, are static on the screen for 400 milliseconds, so it's not the same level of time pressure here. And signal dots, in this case, are arranged in pairs that have a particular spatial relationship to one another, where that spatial relationship, trial by trial, can either be a radial sort of thing, it's like the, we're going into hyperspace, or a concentric pattern, where they're sort of next to each other. And again, the idea is some of these dots are pairs of signal dots, some of them are noise dots that are just randomly put up within this display area. And we're doing the same sort of staircase procedure here to get the threshold of how many signal dots do you need in order to reliably do this form perception task. We're bringing participants into the lab and we're having them do this motion detection task and form perception task under different hand posture conditions. So we have people doing the power grasp, which is typically what you see in other literature on altered vision near the hands. They're almost always using this power grasp posture. The new thing we're doing in our lab is also asking participants, hold your hands just as near the display, but do so while your hands are positioned at the ready instead to perform a precision grasping action. We also, of course, are including a control condition here where the hands are held in the lap while participants are doing this. So we're looking here and pitting two different grasp postures against one another in individual experiments with groups of participants. First, we can compare what's going on with our participants when we have them doing that power grasp versus a hand spar condition. And in this experiment here, we're looking at our y-axis at the percentage of signal dots at threshold in order to be able to do this task. So just a reminder here, lower bars are actually better performance, higher sensitivity on this task. And what we're seeing here is a nice interaction where, relatively speaking, when participants are in that power grasp posture, it's increasing their sensitivity, aiding their ability to do this motion detection task, but that's coming at the expense compared to our control condition of being able to have that fine spatial sensitivity that helps with doing the form perception. Now we can look instead at a separate group of participants where we're having them, again, the hands equally near the display. The only change here is instead of being like this, they're like this, and compare them to a hand spar control condition. So same sort of thing here. And again, we have an interaction, but what you can notice when we're comparing this to the previous slide is this interaction is completely flipped. So the hands are equally near the display here with the precision grasp posture as they were with the power grasp posture. But this time we're seeing that having the hands near the display is actually coming at a cost in doing that motion detection task. You're worse at this when your hands are up near the display at the ready to perform a precision action compared to our control condition. But you do see a gain, you see an advantage in doing this form perception task where you're integrating these pairs of dots in order to come up with the correct solution. So this is some of the first evidence that not all hands are created equal when it comes to sort of visual processing biases in perihand space, but instead the hand's grasp posture, presumably the action this posture affords, is important to creating visual biases. Just really quickly here, we also ran another group of participants where we're directly comparing within subjects the power versus the precision grasp posture. This interaction, same general pattern here. So we really are seeing here that visual processing is embodied, changing not just as a result of our potential to perform any action, but adjusting specifically for particular types of action. Our ability to see the world around us is tied to these adaptations that seem to allow for effective action in our environment. So we're seeing in this first part support for this action affordance hypothesis, which brings kind of that second part, which is if this ability is really about facilitating action, then the hand's function should be more important than their form. It should be, what have we been doing with our hands? What are our hands ready to do? This is what should matter when we're talking about visual biases we see in perihand space. So in order to investigate this question about action experience, we brought participants into the lab for a new study that was a training study where we asked them to learn a novel grasp performance. So we're first going to measure temporal and spatial sensitivity with those same threshold tasks I told you about a few slides ago, and we're doing that under hands near and hands far condition. First, to get a baseline measure of performance. The only thing I want you guys to know here is this time our hands near condition, instead of having them frame the visual display between the palms of their hands where we're ready for a nice grasping action, we're asking participants to hold their hands near the display in a somewhat more awkward palms away. So right off the bat, this does not necessarily suggest very sort of fluid action affordance in terms of acting on information appearing between the hands. So we get these baseline measures of performance, and then we ask participants to train for 6 minutes by moving a target object, mini plunger. I was inspired when hearing a previous talk that this is an object that typically elicits a nice standard power grasping action. You're going to typically grab this, move it around like so. We told participants, no, you can't do that. To move this object, what you need to do is rip it between the backs of your hands, kind of like you're a seal or something. So we had 6 minutes where an RA is reading to them different potential locations based on color coding. The participant is grasping the object, moving it, letting it go, hearing the new location. So they just do this over and over again. The idea here is that this training might cause participants to represent the space near the backs of the hands as if it is a part of power grasping space. That is, I'm learning that when I view information here, it affords my potential to move this object. After the 6 minutes of training, we scoot them over and immediately remeasure their thresholds on that temporal and spatial sensitivity task under hands near and hands far conditions. We brought in a separate group of participants also doing a training task, but these guys are learning a novel precision grasp instead. So we're looking again at baseline performance on those two tasks under hands near, hands far condition. This time it's the little fingers are near the display. So again, this is not going to suggest a real ready action affordance. Maybe if you're trying to like get something out of your ear or drink a fancy tea. But generally speaking, no, I don't really interact with objects using the tips of my pinky fingers. So we're doing this hands near versus hands far. Then these participants are going through 6 minutes on a training task, again, where they're transferring an object that typically elicits a standard precision grasp. We have these little dry beans and a tub here. RA is reading out to them locations. Participants grasp a bean between the two pinky fingers, move it, drop it into whichever tub has been indicated. They're doing this for 6 minutes, presumably learning again this new grasp affordance, learning I can use my pinky fingers to achieve a precision grasp sort of action with an object. So 6 minutes of training, and then we have them going back and we're remeasuring again thresholds on these tasks under little fingers near and hands far conditions. Okay, so in the interest of moving quickly here, I'm gonna just hope you guys trust me that before training, when we were getting baseline measures of performance, no difference whatsoever, statistically speaking, between hands near and hands far conditions for any of these guys. Performance was flat, so it didn't matter if your hands were near the display or not, which is consistent with this action explanation, right? These things aren't appearing in grasping space. Grasping space seems to be what's important. So what I want to show you guys instead is to look at how participants' performance changed after training. That is, after they've learned this new action affordance. So what we're seeing here is I've subtracted post-training threshold scores from pre-training threshold scores. So this is a little bit different in interpreting this graph. We're looking at the percentage of change in terms of percentage of signal versus noise dots. So now when we're seeing higher bars, this is indicating improvement post-training compared to pre-training. And what we can see here when we're looking at those participants who trained on a novel power grasp, we're seeing a specific boost, improvement in performance on this motion detection task, that task where temporal resolution is more important. Now, this isn't just that these people were performing a sort of power, I'm sorry, I said precision, power, right? Power grasping task, right? This motion detection task, we are seeing improvement there. It's not just about performing this task, it's only happening near the backs of the hands, right? We're not seeing the same improvement in our control condition. On the other hand, when we look at our participants in that precision grasping training group, we're seeing the reverse pattern of results again, where those participants are showing improvement specifically in our form perception task. And again, it is specific to viewing information near the tips of the little fingers. So by remapping over the short period of training, they're learning this new affordance that is then carrying over and influencing visual processing in this newly remapped space. So coming back to this idea that vision prioritizes action-relevant information, we're seeing the actions we're able to take when we view an object influences how the visual system processes that object. Processing is biased toward information that's relevant to the actions we are at the ready and our context in terms of positioning, what we're ready to do. We're also seeing here evidence of an unprecedented level of crosstalk between vision and action, illustrating a remarkable plasticity in this case of the visual processing system to accommodate action. We see have short-lived movement in terms of how we're seeing these visual processing biases play out. So we're seeing here that action affordances inform vision. Another question that we've asked in my lab is how this extends, or can this extend, to the actions of other people. So the idea is, does the social context of another actor in our environment also potentially influence visual processing? So this question about visual processing in the hands of other actors is motivated by research showing that people do perceive object affordances based on what we can accomplish with a partner. We're going to say, I can lift that heavy thing. We're going to give different responses to that question if there's somebody else in the room with us who looks like they can lift the heavy thing too. People also tend to represent objects as affording an action, even if that object appears outside of their own action space, but is shown within the action space of another actor or an avatar in a virtual environment. So we know that shared representations do play a role in action understanding, which makes it seem maybe not too far-fetched to think that shared actions might also influence visual processing biases in near-hand space. So to get at this question, we brought participants into the lab and we had them do a very basic task from one of the seminal studies on altered vision in the hands, which is just the basic positive paradigm. The standard finding here in terms of the near-hand literature is if you have a single hand up on a display where you've got two potential target locations, people are faster to detect targets appearing near the hand than targets appearing far away from them. Participants came into our lab and did this. We brought in pairs of participants. So we have one participant who was actually doing the posture task, acting as an observer. That's going to be the woman in this pink shirt in these pictures. And we can test this woman while a friend is sitting next to her. She can have her own hand up on the display, and we're going to see how is she at detecting targets appearing near versus far from her own hand. In other blocks of trials, though, we can have, it's still going to be the woman in pink who is making the responses here, but now her friend is holding her hand up on either of the display, so a target can appear near or far this other person's hand. Of course, we have to also include a control condition here where nobody's hand is in the display. So we first wanted to look at what happens by default when observers are detecting stimuli appearing near their own hand or near the hands of another person. So before we engage in any kind of joint action, we're looking here at just reaction time to detect the simple target, near versus far from the hand. For the no hand condition, near versus far doesn't really make sense, but we're just coding it based on left and right with the same mappings as the other conditions in our experiment. And what we're seeing here, we're replicating the standard effect that there is a reaction time advantage. You're faster to detect objects appearing in your hand space. This is all with that power grasping action, by the way, which you're at the ready to grab quickly. So this makes sense in terms of that other account as well. We're having that sort of rapid temporal processing, we're quickly detecting this change in luminance. We don't see, though, in this case, that there's a bias near the hands of this other person who's sitting next to you. So by default, there's no attentional prioritization here to the space near another actor's hands. So we thought, well, maybe what we need to do here is to have this sort of experience going on to let people know in this given moment, another person's hands are important for affording my own action goals. So we kind of needed to train people to learn we can work together. So to do this, we have participants perform a joint wax sawing task, which we completely and totally stole from Solomon and Glenberg, who have used this task to investigate the existence of a joint body schema, which is really cool, neat work in and of itself. For us, we had participants coming in and doing this task to learn how to work together with another person where their hands movement was very relevant to achieving this action goal. Again, this is a task that they're trying to do quickly. They don't need to be super precise about it, but the idea is each one of us holds one end of this wire that we're coordinating our movements very closely together in order to saw through this block of wax. So people do this task for 4 minutes, and then after this short training period, we're again going to test to see how they are at detecting targets near versus far from their own hands, as opposed to near versus far at the hands of another actor. And now what we're seeing is the effect looks the same near our own hand as it does near the hand of another actor. We're starting to bias processing information appearing in the space of this cooperative actor environment. We've essentially learned this another actor's action space. So we're seeing here additional evidence of the action-driven plasticity of visual biases in perihand space, this time pointing to the importance of social action. So overall here again, we are seeing that it's not just about it's near the hands or not, and that's all that matters, but rather that it's very specific in terms of both our action experience with other actors, as well as using our own hands in novel ways, and also that it's very specifically about the sorts of actions we're ready to perform and how visual information will be most beneficial to helping us perform the actions we're at the ready. And just a little plug here, that experiment about acting with another actor was performed pretty much entirely by my postdoc at the time, my son. My cognition lab.
Should we do clockwise or counterclockwise? You choose.
Let's start from Jeff.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, you're closer.
I thought that last result was particularly intriguing, and I'm wondering whether you've tried this, and if you haven't, I think what happened if you had pairs of people paired up together sawing through, watching one pair watching the other pair saw through, and the question is it only the hand of the person that you actually cooperated with that produces the effect, or is it anybody's
observing? So we have not done this with the sawing task. We have done in my lab where we had pairs of participants where the participant who's performing that cueing task is seeing a picture of a structure, and they're telling the person to move the blocks in certain ways to build the structure. So in this case, the person is affording your action goal of building the structure, and you're paying very close attention. There's all this observation of an action being performed. You don't see the bias in that case. So I think it is tied very specifically to action production on both, from both.
So you framed the earlier results about precision grasp versus the power grasp in terms of temporal versus spatial resolution. I'm wondering if it would also make sense, and I don't know if this is necessarily mutually exclusive, it would also make sense to think of it in terms of more global versus local attention, or diffuse versus focused attention. So if you have like a nanometer, like a big E made up of little H's, and you did the power versus precision, would you expect to see the same kind of effects?
Yes, and it's so there are a couple different camps right now about what is this all about, and one of the camps is about the focusing of attention specifically. So this is sort of Sean Becerra and the students are saying that it is kind of like a single hand is going to have a very narrow focus, two hands have a wide diffuse focus. So there are those folks, and I think they would say yes. The other camp is sort of saying, no, this is about magnocellular versus parvocellular contributions, and they're mutually inhibitory, which I think there's room in that explanation as well for this kind of task.
Yes. In your data, you did show that the distance to the screen matters. My question is related to findings that we did where we did not manipulate the distance between the hand and the screen, but we had people to point or grasp an object, and we cued them, and then in between we did this task with a visual kind of detection task, where the oddball to be detected was either a shape or an intensity target. And what we find is that if you prepare for pointing, but you do not yet point, then you're more sensitive to, I think it was location oddball, whereas if you prepare for grasping, it's more shape oddball you're sensitive to. Now that is, do you think that's entirely different story, or do you think this is all one basic principle operating? Just in your case, let's say proximity was important, but so what's the connection?
Yeah, so a couple things to answer that. I think one is that proximity is key here. So I didn't include the data on this, but we have done a version of this where people are adopting those grasp postures in the lab, and that we don't see the biases. So it really is something that's very specific to kind of this mapping of near hand space. though, is this idea, I think there is a distinction between a preparation to act, or if you're actually like getting ready to do it, programming the action. We never ask people to do anything with their hands here. It's in the absence of intention. It's just strictly posture alone is creating the bias. In the end, could they all be sort of driven by a similar mechanism, the same mechanism? I think it's possible, but I do think there's kind of distinctions to be had between sort of programming of a movement versus I'm just hanging out.
This is going to be more food for thought, but I'm struck by your answer to Paul's question where just simply attending to someone else's hands is not sufficient to then endow upon them whatever advantage they're getting. And picking up on what Susan said about synchronicity, so it actually maybe is going to be something about the fact that that hand was moving in a way that's synchronous with my action, and I wonder if you have any speculation about that, or again, maybe it's just a comment.
Yeah, I think that could be very important. We've been trying different versions of sort of what will give us this effect versus what won't. And everything we've seen that gives us kind of where you get the other person incorporated into your own visual biases do involve pretty close mirroring of really matches up.